Done.
Okay, good.
Take 3. You ready?
Yes.
If you're ready, I am ready. Hi, welcome to the National Critics' Choice Online News. I'm Robin Steinberg. Welcome to the Steinberg Review. And today we have a special guest who is one of America's great writers, known as Professor Jeffery Renard Allen, who holds a PhD in English from the University of Illinois at Chicago. And he has actually published 4 books right now. And the 5th is on its way, which is known as The Song of the Shank, which will be due for release in February in 2014. And he's currently working at the Queen's College City University of New York, and he's now here in Singapore to share with us more about what literature really means and the future of literature. Professor Jeffery, thank you for joining us here
Glad to be here. Thank you.
at the National Critics' Choice, the Steinberg Review. And today's discussion here over at the Singapore Management University.
Yes.
Many have asked, and questioned the future of literature and the study of literature.
Yes.
Now, what is literature to you? And how is it defined in the United States and differ here in Asia?
Well, I think we all have a fairly agreed upon definition of literature. And for me, it involves mastery of the craft of language. So writers who essentially strive to master language and in the process create something beautiful. I think that's really what literature ultimately is, even if the subjects, let's say, of the book or piece you're writing are maybe crass or offensive or whatever it might be. I think literature really involves this attempt to shape language into something beautiful.
Now, you have written 4 books, and the 5th is on its way.
Yes.
And in your experience, in your writings, you actually wrote about personal insights and the way of the American life.
Yes.
Is there a few dynamic issues that you could share with us for our viewers, especially those who are in Asia and even in Europe, who are able to learn in your craft and also to understand some insights on what's happening in the American society,
Okay.
especially the balance between race, religion, and equality.
Right.
And what is it like and feel to live in the United States in your own era?
Oh. Well, I mean, I think these are exciting times in that, we've had our first African American president and so on in the United States. But, my own feeling about it is, one of the things that I write about, as an African American, I'm interested in our experience as Black people in America and what that really means. And my sense of it is that our situation is a lot more dire than some people might imagine. I mean, certainly many African Americans have achieved a lot, but at the same time, many, I think the statistics show that about 60% of African American kids still live in poverty and so on. 3 out of 4 young Black men between the ages of, say, 18 and 32 are either in prison, on parole, or fleeing from the law. We have record numbers of Black men in prison. We have all kinds of problems with education. 75% of our children don't finish high school. If they don't finish high school, then what kinds of jobs they're going to have. So I think there are all these kinds of economic challenges that we still face as African Americans. And I also feel that there is a great spiritual challenge that we face as well. And what I mean by that is, I've done lots of travel in Africa, and from what I've observed there, the thing that people there are striving for is really economic parity. People struggle basically to have food to eat every day, or whatever the case may be. These kinds of basic material necessities. And it's often the case that in the United States with Black people, in contrast, even when we have kind of the basic material, material basics that one needs to survive, that there's something deeper going on that's still represents a dissatisfaction we have. So I think we have a kind of spiritual struggle in as black people in America that really dates back to our history as slaves, and several hundred years of slavery, and then 100 years of segregation after slavery. And I really think those are kind of the issues that I'm interested in, and I see it, I try to meditate on this, so we have this horrible phenomenon of black people killing each other, as we call it, black on black violence. Why is that? Gang violence and drugs and all these kinds of things. And I really think it has to do with this kind of spiritual crisis that many black people in America are undergoing.
Now, what kind of personal relationship do you have in your writings? Because you mentioned today that it is a personal relationship when you write, and could you define some of those experiences?
Sure. I mean, I was saying earlier today, I think for me, the way I view it, there are really two issues when it comes to writing. So I think every writer, myself included, every writer writes because he or she has to. I mean, it's a compulsion we have. It's something that drives us. It's something that defines us. And when we're not writing, we're not happy. So, that's part of our makeup as human beings. That's what a writer is. We are people who make, we're people who create. So the impulse to write starts with that, really. And I can't say, in all honesty, I think it was something that was given to me. I've been writing since I was 7 or 8, and have seen myself as a writer since I was 7 or 8 years old. It was just something that came naturally to me. And, I've read and I've developed my craft and so on. So there's that, all writers have this need for self-expression, and, do it because that's who we are. But at the same time, I think we also have a desire to communicate. Because, we often live in a world where the language is not used for the best purposes. Sometimes, not always, but so, language is used as a vehicle of commerce to sell us things, or language is used by politicians to deceive us into voting for them, or whatever it may be. So language is often used in these very impure forms of manipulation or advertising. It's all kind of form of manipulation. So I feel that one of the purposes of writing is for the writer to keep the language pure and to keep the language honest. And so, when I use words, I say the things that I really feel. And I think that's my primary task, is to say the things that I really feel, and to be, maybe I'm wrong about some of these things, but who knows? But I mean, I think the part of it then is, if you're saying what you honestly feel, you have to also honestly meditate on the things you believe, and part of that process starts with your own life, trying to understand who you are, what your experiences have been, and trying to make sense of that, and then so that becomes part of your basic foundation as a writer, part of your basic material. Is just trying to understand your own place in the world, what your experiences have amounted to, and that's largely what you can communicate, to a reader, because as human beings, we all have the same shared experience, and my job really is to kind of, put myself into the shoes of someone whose experiences may not be unlike mine, but to still figure out, what commonality we have as human beings, and, we all have the same goals and wishes, essentially. And but the only thing I can really draw upon is my personal experience in terms of as a kind of primary foundation for understanding other people. And to some degree, I can draw upon research and things that I find out, but I think it always starts with your own personal experience. That's not to say that I'm an autobiographical writer, because I'm not really. It's only to say that my personal experiences serve as the foundation for what I do with my imagination. And I would say most of the work I do is 90% from the imagination, you know.
Imagination.
Yes.
Okay. Now, what sort of processes do you, put, do you, cultivate, and also what sort of criteria do you set yourself in writing your books?
Well, you know, I mean, well, as a teacher, this is something I think quite a lot about in terms of trying to help young students become published authors. And you know, the thing I always tell them is, you know, writing is always paradoxical, and you know it. So on the one hand, the work has to be instinctive and it has to be in the moment and immediate, but at the same time, it has to be crafted and refined. Um, the work involves a lot of thinking and planning out. At the same time, it often involves a lot of discovery and stumbling upon things, and serendipity, and things been given you that you didn't expect. So there's always this paradoxical process. And one of the things that is paradoxical about this is that to be a writer, you're always looking back at tradition, at the past, at the writers that have come before you. So you're always in a kind of conversation with them, and that conversation was really about discovering who you are as a writer in terms of then looking forward to what you have to say, and in the kind of conversation you're going to engage with in terms of future writers and readers. So what that means basically is one of the things you do as a writer is you read to really discover what it is that you like about writing. And you find out what you like about writing by reading the writers that you like, or discovering the writers that you like. And then you try to understand why that speaks to you, what speaks to you about it. And then to some degree you're then taking that, what you've learned from these writers, and then you're trying to transform it into something that's wholly yourself, So that's part of the process, I think. I don't think there's such a thing as mastery of writing, in the sense that one arrives at a place where, now I'm a master writer, so I don't have to do any more work. I mean, I don't think it ever works, it operates that way. What happens is, you can achieve certain mastery of a particular project you're working on. You've got the language for that, but then you're constantly reading and constantly trying to learn more things, and constantly trying to understand the literature and the art of fiction, or the art of poetry, and the craft of writing more. It's always a continual learning process. And so, and that's the way I see it. So I'm there to teach my students, but I'm also there to try to learn about some of the things that interest them. And I think it's partly because language is a living thing, and the writer is always in relationship then with this living language, and you have to be, in the movement with it, to dance with it, and that's kind of how I see it, So.
Amazing. Now, how do Americans, African Americans view Martin Luther King versus Nelson Mandela? And because it has actually influenced the culture of the American life, as well as the way their thought life, and even in their writings and expression.
Yes.
So how does this affect the society, and what is your views in your personal
Of these two
writing?
men?
Yeah, two men, yes. And also, has that affect in your writing as well?
That's a hard question in some ways. I can't say, well, let's put it like this. I mean, I guess when Martin Luther King was assassinated, I was 6 years old, I believe, or thereabouts. I mean, I didn't have much sense of it, obviously, at that age, but, let me just be very personal about what I think here. When I hear Martin Luther King speak, and I listen to his speeches, it makes me want to cry, because there's such a powerful way that he uses the language, and there's such a spirit of expression and of honesty and of truth there, and of this courage, tremendous courage. and it really does bring me to tears, when I hear his voice, and there's just something about that. And I think for me, I don't know what I would call it, but I think it's a kind of ancestral language, and it goes back to the deepest sources of what it means to be human, and it goes back to the deepest sources of our spirituality. And that's really what I'm striving for as a writer. I mean, that's really the ultimate challenge I give myself, is to try to give my readers that same powerful experience with language. So that's really, among other things, that's what I've taken from Dr. Martin Luther King. I mean, I think he, that's just his voice was just so incredible, and the way he used words and the tone of his voice and the emotion behind it. It was almost like he was singing the words. And this is a kind of tradition that I'm familiar with from black churches that I grew up in Chicago and so on. So that, I mean, and I think this is, and also his life was an example that there are times when we have to sacrifice ourselves for the better cause, for the common good. So that's, his life serves as an example of that to me, always, and something I try to believe, and I believe you have to have a clean heart and love, and so that's what it is. And as far as Nelson Mandela, I mean, obviously to a great degree his experience was much more remote from me because he was South African, but I was in college, during the apartheid era, and I was involved in some, divestment movement and those kinds of things. And, and I think the same thing here. I mean, I can't say his voice necessarily has the same emotional power as Martin Luther King, because it doesn't. I mean, he was a lawyer, and, and I guess he uses language in a different way. But, I mean, I think his life serves as an example. I mean, this man who, basically went to prison for 27 years for doing nothing. I mean, he did nothing wrong. He did nothing immoral, and he stood on principle for what he believed, and he was sent to prison for all these years. I mean, and he could have come out of prison bitter and angry and all of that, but he didn't. And I think that's a major example also to the world. So the fact that this man believed in trying to put the past behind and to move ahead, I think that's important. So.
Now you mentioned about the importance of becoming human, and what it means to be a human. Do you think that the human race lacks this element in literature, and how important is it going to be in the coming days?
Well, I think I'm not sure if I can quite answer that, but I'll tell you. I guess it's in our darkest moments when we are really, as writers or anyone else, that we really are forced to really come to what we believe. And I remember as a teacher, when 9/11 happened, the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon and so on, we had class one week, and then attacks happened, and this is in New York, where I live in New York, and so the school, I think, was closed for the next week, and maybe for 2 weeks after that or something, because it was not too far from the area where the World Trade Center was. And so then the day we came back to class, or before we came back to class, I was thinking to myself, what do you say to these students? We've just suffered this. The writing just seems completely pointless in the face of something as horrible as this. And I had really asked myself, the thing I remembered is, one of my favorite writers, the great novelist, white Southerner actually, William Faulkner. And I remember the speech he gave when he won the Nobel Prize, an acceptance speech that he gave, and he said something about how the human spirit will endure. That whatever the forces are of destruction in the world, he believes in the endurance of the human spirit. And that's what I think writing is about ultimately, that it shows us both, who we are, shows us who we are as human beings, the worst things that we're capable of, but also the best things that we're capable of too, so.
Stop.
Out of time there.
No, wait, I forgot one thing.
Okay.
It's a miracle. It's a no. It's a miracle that he ran without power.
Okay. The camera worked?
No, he ran without power.
Okay. It had some battery life left, but it wasn't charged.
Okay. Okay, part 2 now. Don't worry.
Alright.
Because we can edit that. Don't worry.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, I was just saying, I think that writing can, that's one of the things the writer can do is to show the best of who we are as humans and the worst of who we are as humans, but I think it's important to be reminded of both of those things. Yeah.
Now, you also mentioned that today that is literature a underground phenomenon, because a lot of people, even I myself, have observed that it's becoming more and more remote.
Yes.
And with the example, like in the movie I've watched, that's called Finding Forrester.
Okay.
It's becoming
Right,
that has starred Sean Connery and one other actor, and it's an amazing story.
Right.
The way it was orchestrated, and how English language was plays an important part for this student.
Right. Yes.
And it has talked about the way how society is converse in the United States.
Right.
Now, what is your view on what is going on with the trends where English language is now becoming more and more underground phenomenon?
Well, yeah, I was arguing earlier that literature is really become a kind of underground phenomenon in the sense that, I guess what I really was saying is that, many books are still published and many books are read, but the reality is that fewer and fewer books that we would consider literary are read, by the public. I mean, there are more and more writers, which is one of the problems is that America is such a huge country, and there's so many writers and trying to publish books. There's such a tremendous amount of competition, and it only increases. But so I think what's happened, I think there are kind of two things that are happening. One is that to some degree, everybody in America wants to be a writer. This is the irony. Most people don't read books, but they want to be a writer. They think there's something, like everyone thinks that they have an interesting story to tell, and for that reason they should write it down. And and they think it's really, that's all there is to it. That's what a lot of people believe. They don't understand that this is a craft, that you have to work at. And I think that in part explains the blogging phenomenon, where not only just blogging phenomena, but these fan pages where people write fan fiction in response to some of their favorite novels or whatever it might be. And so, you have all that going on. But I think, like in a place like New York City, which is still the literary capital of America, I mean, there's a very active literary community. There's a very active literary community in Chicago, where I'm from. But I still think that that's on the fringes of the culture to a large degree. And, I mean, there are people who are working hard at trying to write well, and there are people who read us, but that readership is dwindling. And I think the numbers of good books are dwindling, and the numbers of publishers who are willing to take a risk on certain kinds of books is dwindling. So these are the kinds of things that make literature an underground phenomenon in America. And also the writer is largely ignored in American society, and that's become ever more the case. It used to be that writers were invited onto talk shows or were asked their opinions about things, and no one does that anymore. So we're the expert. We're not seen as one of the experts when it comes to whatever it might be, and so I think that's part of the whole kind of disappearance of literary culture in America.
Could you tell us more about your upcoming new book itself, and what can new readers can expect from your new book that's going to be due for release in 2014?
Yes. Well, the novel is called Song of the Shank, and it's loosely based on a real person, a guy whose name is Thomas Green Wiggins, and he was born a slave in Georgia in 1849 and was this musical prodigy. He started giving public recitals on the piano when he was age 6, and I think he was about 9 when he played at the White House, and eventually he played all across the U.S., all across the U.K. and throughout Europe, and by some accounts he became the most famous pianist of the 19th century, pianist and composer. So I kind of stumbled upon his story by accident and started to write about him quite a number of years ago. So the book is very loosely based on a few years of his life, and but once again, like a lot of it is largely invented. So one of the things that attracted me to his story was the fact that there were so many unanswered questions about his life and about the people who surrounded him. So those were gaps, spaces where my imagination could go and try to figure out who this guy was and what his life really meant, in the end. And it's also process of recovery in the sense that this is a man who's been written out of musical history for whatever reason. And so I'm hoping that my book, if nothing else, or at least one of the things that I would do is to put him back into the conversation when we start to talk about musical geniuses,
Does he have any relatives or any,
He does actually have relatives. He has some relatives and so on. And there was actually a recent biography about him, or as recent as 2009. But once again, I don't think he's a household name, certainly. And when everyone knows that Mozart or Beethoven are, we know who these people are, but no one's ever heard of Blind Tom for the most part, So, which is the name he played under, stage name Blind Tom. And so that's kind of what the book is about. It's about some of the things that have always interested me in writing, and music, questions of family, questions of race, and what is the imagination, and what role does imagination play, and just questions of freedom, and the struggle for democracy, I think, are some of the kinds of things
Now,
that this book is.
before we end, what is democracy?
Oh, what?
Yeah, what is your definition of democracy to you?
Well, that's an excellent question, I think, because for me, I think democracy is more than just having these institutions in place that allow you to vote, because I think there are always processes where, I guess what I'm saying, I don't think voting in a democratic election, so-called, I don't think that in and of itself guarantees the country is democratic. I think what a true democracy strives to do is to give everyone an equal opportunity to have a good life, and to give you the best chance of achieving that. So, I've been a number of places in the world, and I would say that America certainly has certain problems, and I feel it's one of the things that disturbs me about my country sometimes is I feel that there are people in my country who really want to railroad the democratic process, and I think if they see themselves as true Americans, they wouldn't be trying to do that. So that's what I feel. I think there has to be more than just elections. I think there have to be these checks and balances in place that allow people the opportunity to vote, that allow people access to good education, and those kinds of things. So,
Before we end, could you give us 3 key advice on what it takes to be a writer, and how can one begin writing? Because you have done 4 books, and your 5th book is coming out very soon. And in your experience, how can you help those who are struggling to be a writer?
well, I think the first thing to realize about writing is you should only do it if it's something that you really are driven to do, because otherwise it's just too much hard work. You can't. So in other words, that's to say, you can't write because you want to make money, or because you want fame or adulation, or or the admiration of whomever. I mean, I don't think you can write for those reasons. The first thing you should do is to write because it's something you really want to do and need to do. The second thing I would advise is, if you're serious about writing, you have to be willing to work hard. which is to say that good writing is hard work. That's something else to recognize. You know, that it's not easy to write well, and it takes a lot. It'll take a lot of your time. It'll demand a lot of you. And the third thing I would say is to read as much as you can. I think most of what we read as writers comes from reading. You know, and probably 80% of what we learn about writing comes from reading. So those are the three things. Do it because you really want to do it. You know, be willing to work hard and read. Those are the three things.
What was your last book you have read so far?
Last book I read. Actually, well, I have a good Kenyan writer friend named Benyabanga Wanena. I'm reading his memoir. I'm actually rereading it because I'm teaching it next week in a class. So that's what I've been reading. You know.
Okay, great. Well, Professor Jeffery Renard Allen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Here at the National Critics' Choice. And here at the National Critics' Choice, the Stienberg Review, thank you for joining me and with Professor Jeffery Renard Allen. And have a good week ahead. And please do pick up his book soon. And if you still hunger for his work, you can check it out on the Amazon and get his books. And once again, have a good week. Bye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I will edit that and
Okay.
let you know. It will be divided.